Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Happy to be with you.
All right, well, we had the federal budget come out. First of all, in a general sense, Dan, what were your thoughts from the organization's viewpoint on the budget?
Well, we were pleased to see that it remains focused very much on the pandemic and helping many small firms to try to get to the other side of it. So that was a positive. There were some important additions to the budget, most notably the renewal of the wage and the rent subsidy. That now will extend, those two programs will extend until the until the fall of 2021. They will start, though, over the summer to be able to ramp down, assuming that COVID is starting on the downtick. But still, important signal to the economy that the government is considering extending the wage and the rent subsidy. It's been super important for so many businesses. About 2/3 of small firms have taken advantage of the wage subsidy. Fewer, though, on the rent subsidy. There's still some access issues that need to be addressed. And those things weren't fixed in the budget just the other day. The other big signal that we liked in the budget was a new hiring incentive that will be launched over the summer. Assuming we get to the recovery phase, solidly on the recovery phase by June of this year. The government has said that there's a lot of small firms that will struggle to reunite themselves with their staff, to bring back staff that they had to lay off, or to create new jobs for other Canadians. That's something that's going to be pretty critical. So the government has put in place a hiring incentive that's going to pay up to 50% of the wages for new employees, new hours that you're adding to your business. It's going to compare it to what's going on right now. If you add some staff, add some hours, raise your wages, a variety of circumstances, the government will pick up for the summer and into the fall about 50% of that cost, up to about, I think the subsidy maxes out at about $550 a week.
Okay. Was there anything that you would have liked to see in the budget?
Yeah, there was a couple of big misses. The most important one, I hinted at this a second ago, there were no changes made to the access troubles that many firms have had in gaining the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, or the CEBA loan program. No changes whatsoever to try to make it a little bit easier. This really affects new businesses, those firms that we've spoken about before that started up in 2020. They've had access to zero government support through the entire pandemic. And so we've been urging Ottawa to fix that gap to ensure that those small firms can gain access to some of the programs that other firms have been able to use. Government hasn't moved on this. We're still pushing that file actively. A whole bunch of gaps on the rent support program as well. A lot of firms that have their business in an operating company, but they're building in a holding company. They've not been able to access the rent support program either, and we've been pushing Ottawa to fix that. And then, of course, another big gap is the fact that there's nothing in the budget to try to reduce some of the debt levels that businesses have had to take on during the COVID emergency. The average small firm, as we've spoken about before, has taken on $170,000 in new COVID-related debt. The government didn't extend or announce another forgivable component to CEBA, the CEBA loan program. They haven't added a new forgivable component to the HASCAP program that we were actively pushing for. So debt remains a big issue that was a miss in the 2021 budget.
Okay. Well, we have you here. You mentioned the debt load. Remind me again some of the figures that you, as an organization, have talked about in the recent past about businesses and how many will not survive this.
Yeah, we are really worried about how many firms are just unlikely to make it across the COVID finish line. Our projection at CFIB is that on top of about 60,000 businesses that failed in 2020, there's going to be a further 180,000 businesses fail over the next number of months. And that was projected even before the third wave hit. Now, with additional lockdowns in several provinces, Alberta, BC, Ontario, elsewhere, We're seeing more businesses close their doors permanently. They're closing their doors to in-store traffic in many circumstances, temporarily, we hope. But the damage from that could take out even a larger number. Our upward estimate is that there could be 220,000 businesses that fail this year. That would be 1 in 5 businesses gone forever as a result of the damage inflicted by COVID restrictions. So, we're not out of this by any means. And our main message to both the feds and the provincial governments is you need to keep supporting your business community. If you're going to ask them to stay closed longer, their bills aren't going away. You got to help them out.
And it depends, right? As you mentioned, different provinces, right? So obviously, Ontario and Alberta, BC, and Quebec are the ones that are being hit, I guess, from your members. What are you finding geographically? What's I'm presuming that Ontario, because it seems Ontario has the most strict measures in place. So I'm assuming that businesses in Ontario, your members, are the ones that are feeling it the hardest.
They have been absolutely hit the hardest. They've been facing the longest lockdown measures really in North America, in Ontario. But it depends on the sector of the economy. I mean, indoor restaurant dining is basically prohibited in huge swaths of Canada right now. British Columbia added to the mix.
Yeah.
We've got a whole host of measures. But you're right, Alberta, BC, Ontario, Quebec, these are the provinces where COVID is hitting the hardest. Our members in Atlantic Canada are in much, much better shape. Manitoba at the moment seems to be in decent shape, although they did announce a few restrictions of their own. So it's really cutting differently. What I've noticed in Alberta, though, is that the Alberta government has tried to keep as many businesses open as possible. They haven't shut down retail, for example, once again, whereas Ontario, the entire province, all retailers are closed other than those selling essential goods.
Yeah.
And that's taking a giant toll on the business community, huge swaths. I mean, I've got members here in Ontario, CFIB members, that have been shut down into indoor restaurant dining for over 300 days. Gyms closed for over 300 days. Hair salons, nail salons for 200 and I think 60 days so far since the pandemic started. It's just crazy.
When you mentioned those numbers, what surprises me is that a lot of them have hung on, for 300 plus days, and waiting. That must be the most optimistic and hopeful people around, I guess, right?
Or the most desperate. I mean, what I think if we had told business owners that you were going to be closed for the better part of a year, many would have packed in their business altogether. But they've continued to hope that next month they might be able to open. So they hang on a little bit longer. They put more money on their credit card. They borrow from their friends or their family. They've remortgaged their home in order to try to keep their businesses afloat. It's cruel right now what's happening to these businesses. I get that we're dealing with a third wave and we've got to take it seriously. That's not my question. But for goodness sakes, a lot of business owners are asking, are we shutting down the right things? Spread is happening in these large industrial settings where where thousands of people work together. Very little evidence that spread is happening at the local the local shop or even the local hair salon, and yet they've been closed down.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, Dan. Because that's one thing that I noticed, right? Is that you have a lot of areas where people are congregated that governments seem to have no problems with. Whether it's and again, it's all different across the country, but certain places in the country, the schools are okay to be there, right? And then you mentioned all these factories, those warehouses where people are in there like crazy, or the meat packing plants. And you look at the list. I know in Alberta, I look at the list of outbreaks, and boy, you can tell where the outbreaks are. They're not in individual places, right? They're usually where people meet. Why do you think that's I guess continuing to allow that?
Look, it's a good question. Governments have deemed certain types of businesses essential.
Yeah.
They've said that it's essential that we keep manufacturing plants open, essential that we keep warehousing open. Obviously, it's essential that we keep the food system going because we as Canadians can't be without it.
Yeah.
I understand that, and I share those views that there are a lot of essential businesses, but for goodness sake, in many ways, every business is essential. It's certainly essential to the family that's running the business and depends on it for their source of income.
Yeah.
And so this artificial line that we've drawn, in many respects, makes little sense. And look, our position is that we do need to take COVID seriously. We're not asking for government to rip away every restriction and just go, become that Canada should become Texas tomorrow.
Yeah.
But what we are saying is that there are other ways to try to address the COVID challenge. Where the heck is rapid testing? Yes, we've got a few experiments happening. But why aren't we saying, okay, if your hair salon wants to stay open or your restaurant wants to stay open, then rapid test your employees 3 times a week. If you can show that there's no spread happening, then you can stay open. If
Yeah.
you test and your employee's positive, you got to send them home. I
Yeah.
mean, these are some of the practical solutions that we've been trying to get governments to consider. Blanket lockdowns are what we're opposing, not restrictions. Some provinces have done better than that. Ontario seems to be in love with lockdowns. Other provinces have used them sparingly. They've applied them for periods of time, then removed them. That creates its own problems. But I can tell you, after speaking to many hair salons and other business owners, they've said, look, if I were able to open for a couple of months, even if I know that I'm going to have subject to close down again, at least I have a few months of income to try to make it through the next year.
Yeah, exactly. Last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Dan, like we all talk about numbers, closures and, level of debt, we talk about, the economic pain, et cetera. But I think one of the things that doesn't really get explored a lot is the mental side of this,
Yeah.
right? What are you hearing from members out there of 1 year of having to go through this?
Well, there's two parts to kind of some of the mental health challenges that are very real in small and medium-sized business. One of them is the mental state of the business owner, him or herself, the family that is working in the business. And it has just been brutal,
Yeah.
soul crushing for businesses to have to lay off their staff and then rehire them and lay them off again. Uh, Damaging because the family is worried about whether they're going to have an income, or in many cases, whether they're even going to be able to keep their house because the home was mortgaged in order to get the business going.
Yeah.
So the cycle and just the toll that we're all feeling as Canadians trapped in our basements is pretty significant. And then you add to that, of course, the stress that business owners have to be concerned with that is on their employees who are nervous about working with other people, employees who are worried about losing their jobs or seeing their employer perhaps permanently go away. This is something that's high on the mind. Business owners are trying to keep people optimistic and excited about returning to work. But as the pandemic wears on, it's harder and harder to do that. I'm feeling this for my staff at CFIB. We have 400 employees across the country. And as you and I have spoken about, our new total is that we've taken 90,000 calls from business owners since the start of the pandemic.
Wow.
So my staff that answers the phone, that are on the front lines trying to provide advice on the CEBA loan program or the wage subsidy to business owners, they're also getting an earful of just how sad, how worried many business owners are, and it's sapping their energy too. I mean, we're all feeling it in all parts of society.
Yeah.
And I think you're quite right. It's been flying under the radar as an issue among entrepreneurs for some time.
Yeah. Okay. Super. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today, Dan.
Anytime.
All right. That was Dan Kelly, who is president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.